Hello to all my dear friends. I wish you a peaceful and beautiful new day. Today, I'm bringing you a story that sits right at the intersection of fear and hope. It's a journey about a mother named Tieu Hue, who is trying to outrun a past that refuses to stay behind her. Sometimes, the hardest part of finding safety isn't the running, it's believing you actually deserve to stay. Let's dive into the first chapter of her story. The rhythmic creak of the hammock was the only sound in the small, sun-drenched room. Tieu Hue sat on the edge of a wooden chair, her eyes fixed on her daughter, Phuc An. For the past few days, a high fever had taken hold of the little girl's body, leaving her restless and crying out in discomfort.
Hue gently rocked the hammock, her heart sinking with every labored breath the child took. In the quiet, Huen's mind was a battlefield. While the house was peaceful, her thoughts were anything but. She lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, her ears straining for the sound of a heavy footstep or a slurred shout. Her greatest fear wasn't the fever itself, but the man who had caused so many of their past traumas, Phuc An's father. Every time the wind rattled the door, she froze, terrified that he would find them and take the child away again. A soft knock at the door broke her trance. It was the lady of the house, a woman whose kindness felt almost alien to Hue.
"Is Phuc An asleep yet, dear?" she whispered. "Yes, she's finally drifted off," Hue replied quietly.
The woman nodded, adjusting her shawl. She was dressed for a wedding far away and wouldn't be back until late. Before leaving, she reminded Hue that the refrigerator was stocked with food and urged her to eat. She mentioned that Mr. Van and Mr. Tan, the two policemen who had provided them with this sanctuary, were at the station for a briefing and wouldn't be home for dinner. "Take care of yourselves," the woman said kindly before heading out. Hue watched her leave, feeling a wave of gratitude mixed with a crushing sense of guilt. She was safe, she was fed, and she was protected by the law itself. Yet she felt like a ghost haunting a home that wasn't hers. As the house fell silent again, the memories Hue had tried to bury began to resurface. She looked at her daughter's innocent face and felt a pang of agony. Phuc An was so young, yet she had already witnessed things no child should see. The shouting, the rage, and the smell of cheap alcohol that always preceded the violence. Hue remembered the nights when her husband would come home, his eyes bloodshot and his mind clouded by drink. He didn't work, he only drank and vented his frustrations on her. The verbal abuse was constant, but it was the physical pain and the look of terror in her daughter's eyes that finally gave Hue the strength to run. "How will our future look?" she whispered to the empty room. Since the day he had kicked them out of the house, Hue had been a fugitive from her own life. She felt like a burden to Mr. Van and his family, a complication they didn't need. The walls of the safe house, intended to protect her, were beginning to feel like they were closing in. She knew that as long as she stayed, she was putting her benefactors at risk. In the heavy silence of the house, Tieu Hue watched her daughter, Phuc An, who was exhausted from a high fever. Her heart tightened as she recalled the dark days at their old home. She could still vividly smell the pungent stench of alcohol every time her husband returned. He refused to work, spending his days intoxicated and venting his rage on his wife and child through constant verbal abuse and brutal beatings. Her greatest fear remained that one day he would reappear and take Phuc An away once more. Tieu Hue felt like a burden. Ever since her husband kicked them out, She and her daughter had bothered Mr. Van and Mr. Tan's family far too much. Although they treated her with immense kindness and affection, the insecurity in her heart wouldn't let her stay. She feared her presence would bring trouble to these good-hearted policemen if her ex-husband ever tracked them down. "I think we have to leave, my child," she whispered through tears. She hurriedly searched for paper and a pen. She wanted to write down her deepest thanks so that Mr. Van and the lady of the house wouldn't worry. She promised herself that once their lives were stable, she would return to show her gratitude. Not far away, Tuan, Huyen's husband, was enduring hours of misery. He hid in narrow alleys, his stomach churning with hunger and his throat parched with thirst. Amidst panic and starvation, he struggled between the need to find food and the fear that the police were searching the nearby area for him. Despite being the source of so much suffering, Tuan kept wondering if his wife had been caught by the police and was attempting to sneak out in the scorching heat to gather information. Mr. Van's house had never felt so silent. Tieu Hue held the pen, her hand trembling as she placed it on the blank sheet of paper. She wanted to write so much, but her throat felt bitter. She wrote of her infinite gratitude toward Mr. Van's family and how she didn't want their presence to jeopardize his career or safety. "My child and I must leave," she wrote, her tears blurring the ink. She feared that any delay would allow her ex-husband to find them and take Fukan away again. After folding the letter and placing it on the table, Huyen hurriedly packed their meager belongings. She took Fukan, the child still warm with fever, into her arms. She decided they had to leave immediately, before darkness fell and before the household returned from work. Her steps were frantic. Every rustle of dry leaves underfoot sent a jolt of terror through her. Meanwhile, at the other end of the alley, Tuan was struggling with gnawing hunger and a parched throat. He lurked like a ghost, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and the fear that the police were scouring the area. "I wonder if the police caught my wife at home," he muttered, his heart a mix of rage and anxiety. Under the scorching sun, Tuan tried to approach locals to beg for water and fish for information. A woman, perhaps Huyen or an acquaintance, was frantically searching the neighborhood. She stopped some children playing nearby to ask, "Children, did you see a strange man wearing black pants and a white shirt pass by here?" The innocent children pointed toward a deep, narrow alley where a shadow in black pants and a white shirt had just vanished. Tieu Hue walked through the stifling heat of the late afternoon, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. As she turned into the narrow alley the children had pointed out, a familiar silhouette emerged from behind some debris. It was Tuan. He looked pathetic, his white shirt stained with grime and his face haggard from hunger and thirst. Seeing his wife and child, Tuan froze. His eyes no longer held the usual aggression of a drunkard. Instead, they reflected a desperate plea. He stepped closer, his voice rasping as he asked for a drink of water. Huyen held Fukan tightly to her chest, the child's breath still burning with fever. On one side was the trauma of past beatings, and on the other was a lingering sense of shared history that made it impossible for her to move forward. As the two stood facing each other in silence, the sudden wail of a police siren echoed from the main road. Tuan startled, his eyes darting around for an escape route. He knew that officers like Mr. Van and Mr. Tan were searching the nearby area. Tuan looked at Huyen one last time, his lips moving as if to say something, before he hurriedly vanished into the darkness of the deep alley. The police sirens faded into the distance of the main boulevard, leaving the narrow alley in an eerie, bone-chilling silence. Tieu Hue stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her arms still clutching Fukan tightly. The child stirred slightly. The fever seemed to have subsided somewhat in the cool evening air. She looked down at the ground where Tuan had just stood, seeing nothing but muddy footprints and a small, crumpled piece of paper he had accidentally dropped. While fleeing, Huyen tremblingly picked up the paper. It wasn't a threat. It was a tattered old photograph of the three of them on the day of Fukan's 1-month celebration. A time before alcohol had clouded Tuan's eyes, and before violence had torn their home apart. On the back of the photo was a faint, scrawled message. Find medicine for her. At the end of the alley, the flashlights of the authorities began to sweep across the high walls. Mr. Van's voice calling her name echoed from afar, filled with worry and urgency. Huyen looked toward the light of her benefactors, then back into the pitch-black darkness where Tuan had vanished. She knew she couldn't run forever, but would she walk toward the protection of the law, or follow the shadows to find the answer to a father's belated repentance? The last dry leaf fell. Huyen's footsteps echoed, but which way she turned, only the night truly knows.
Thank you so much for watching today's video until the very end. Your presence is the greatest gift to me. Every view and every moment you spend here is a huge motivation for me to keep improving and releasing higher quality content in the future. Creating content isn't easy, but your silent support gives me the strength to stay creative every day. If you found today's video interesting and relaxing, please don't hesitate to give me a like. Your small actions are the most precious recognition of our team's hard work, and especially if you are new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming videos. The growth of this channel depends so much on your support. Let's build a civilized and connected community together. Once again, thank you.